Kyle, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, we were chatting a little bit before of how I discovered you, like most of the world, right, as the captain online, and your thoughts and your words of wisdom and your very honest, introspective view of the world and individuals in it. And like so many people, I lashed on and I was like, "This is good shit." And now here we are having this conversation. But I want to go back to before the captain. Let's talk a little bit about who was Kyle Creek before the captain was created, and then we'll get into the whole story from there.
Yeah, I mean that probably is a pretty good place to start. So before I created the captain, I grew up in Utah. I grew up LDS, and it kind of caused me in my teenage years a lot of turmoil, as a lot of religious upbringings can, in the sense that I just felt lost. I felt misunderstood, and so I always enjoyed reading. I always enjoyed writing too, because it was kind of a nice creative outlet to reflect on my thoughts, but also to, I guess you could say, escape at times, especially as a kid. I used to read a lot, just to kind of escape reality, which I think most children do. But later in life, as I started making money as a writer, I was working for an advertising company at the time. I was just so grateful to finally be making money as a writer. I mean, I had an apartment, I had a new truck, and I was really paranoid of losing it all. So when I started utilizing social media, I didn't want my real name on there for the sake of protecting my professional career. I was afraid maybe I'd say something or express something that would get me in trouble with my bosses at the time. And so when I started sharing my opinions and outlooks, I used the captain as essentially a protective layer on myself, really to prevent, job loss. But as it went on, it became a protective layer to prevent any real vulnerability. Um, I could share a lot. I could express very controversial opinions, because if anything came back to me, it was easy to say, "Oh, that was just the captain. That wasn't Kyle Creek." So it allowed me to kind of dip my toe in the water as far as sharing aspects of myself I might have been uncomfortable with sharing as Kyle.
Sure.
And after enough time, I started really having that crisis of identity, and I had to eventually take a decent hiatus from social media to kind of regain my composure as an individual and stop being, this faceless figure online per se.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Have you ever heard of I think it's called, like, let me look it up really quick. It's called like the Batman effect. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was as cool as Batman. I'm certainly not as rich as Batman, but
one
I'd
day, right?
imagine I could. Yeah, I mean, I could imagine where you're going with this.
Yeah, so it's actually a thing, and it's essentially adopting an alter ego and viewing oneself as a separate entity. So, and it ends up boosting confidence, determination, and it reduces
Mm.
anxiety in people. So it's a real thing that people are doing, whether it's healthy or not, I don't know. But those are all positive things. Did you find when you created the captain that it began to give you more confidence
It
in your
absolutely
life?
did. That's one of the reasons why I did it. It made it very easy to express super harsh opinions or very honest opinions, or like I said earlier, vulnerable sides of myself, because I felt like I had a protective layer. And I started getting so much notoriety as the captain that I would go out and more people knew me as the captain than knew me as Kyle. I mean, aside from my close friends or people that grew up with me, everyone knew me as the captain. A lot of my newer friends that came into my life in my 20s just called me captain. Like, they wouldn't even call me my real name. So it became something I derived a lot of confidence from, because I attribute a lot of my career success to the captain, when in reality it was all me. It has always been me. It just became hard to separate that when I would have moments of my life that I was down, that I was dealing with depression, and without having myself to fall back on or myself to derive confidence from, it made it very hard to feel as though the only way to maintain my confidence was to continue feeding this beast and continue being this character online. Um, so to answer your question, frankly, again, absolutely, it gave me confidence.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly see that, right? It's so funny. You think about what I've done, and a lot of my journey within podcasting was I was so afraid to share my. I would always consider myself vulnerable. Like here's the things I
Hmm.
went through, right? My mom was an addict, ended up taking her life. My dad was in jail at one point, all these things. And I would share them, but I was so afraid to share like my own weaknesses, the things that
Hmm.
I was wrong, right? The fact that I was a bad partner in loving relationships, the fact that I was, I couldn't control certain aspects of myself. And once I began to be able to open up to that, there was like a superpower to it, right? Now, it took me a long time. I couldn't do it right off the bat because it was Justin Shank and I was trying to navigate those waters. If you were to go back and do it again, do you think you would have been just the captain again and then seen where it went? Or do you think you would have approached it as Kyle Creek?
I would have likely still used the captain to an extent because it almost was kind of a fun exercise to develop this side of myself. I definitely would have started utilizing my real name and putting myself out there more sooner because I know I could have prevented a lot of pain for myself and I could have likely been even more successful as a writer because I was going to say, although the captain gave me confidence initially, it became a big crutch. And now, where I'm at this part of my life, when I'm embracing this Kyle Creek part of myself, I'll probably never author another book under the captain. Everything will say Kyle Creek from here on out. I found writing to be easier. I found my work to be more impactful.
Hmm.
I believe my work is better. And a lot of that comes with time, regardless, just as you kind of develop your voice. I find it much easier, just as you were saying. My confidence now comes from the fact that I feel as though people can't hurt me in the sense that I share so much about my life in hopes of other people feeling understood or not feeling alone, that it makes it very hard for things to, essentially chink my armor, as you would say, because it's something I've already admitted about myself. And, we talked about this before. Once you've admitted to 500,000 people you want to kill yourself, there's not a lot of things that can hurt you at that point. I mean, that's like the most embarrassing thing to get out for most people. But I found it incredibly relieving. And I have found life now to be just so much less complex. Decision making's easier, writing's easier, and just life in general has been a lot better since I allowed myself to appreciate the captain for what it was in my life, but also detach from it.
No, I love it. And so you mentioned earlier about taking a hiatus from the internet, and when you came back, that's when you started opening up and being vulnerable. Take us back to the moment you decided to step away from it. What was the thought process behind that, and why did you feel like you had to shut it down for a while?
So prior to that, I'd been living in New York City and I was a creative director and essentially a silent partner in an advertising agency. And I was 30 when I started in New York in the ad world, and I got fairly successful fairly quickly. I often had people would often ask me, how the hell did you make creative director at 30 years old? And I took a lot of pride in my career. I took a lot of pride in the fact that I was, living in a luxury tower in New York and I was overlooking the city every night. And it got to a point where I realized advertising just no longer satiated me as a creative, as a writer. And so I quit that job. I left and I stayed in New York for another month or two. And then I decided to move across country to LA. And I was hoping to get a start there in TV. I had some connections. My girlfriend was living there at the time, and we were both kind of tired of doing the long distance thing. So I moved to LA. I thought for sure my career was just going to take off there like it had for the past 5 years for me. And I struggled with it. I had a hard time connecting with anything. None of my ideas really panned out as planned. And so after about 4 or 5 months of that, and just constantly questioning whether or not I made the right choices, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't have a lot of work to distract me, and so I was with myself a lot more than I had been in numerous years. It's like I said earlier, I didn't really have myself to fall back on. If I wasn't busy or I wasn't doing something as the captain, if I wasn't writing another book or doing another speaking engagement, I felt really worthless and purposeless. And it weared on me for years. I honestly felt that, but I kept myself busy enough to really not internalize it too much. But during that downtime, it really hit me. And I just realized that my depression was going to continue getting worse if I kept feeding it the way I was. And my girlfriend and I decided to break up. Well, I say we decided, she decided to break up. And it was kind of the last straw for me to realize I needed to get my shit together. And in order to do that, I had to be with myself more than ever before. So I got off social media. I opened myself up to everything I've been closed off to in terms of therapy. I mean, I never wanted to see a therapist. I was paranoid that a therapist would take all my good ideas from me because I needed those ideas to think about in order to have good jokes and stuff. And I started doing therapy, started reading spiritual books. And when I did feel ready to come back to social media and share my story, I put my real name on my profile. And prior to that, people couldn't really find who I was because I didn't have personal social media up to that point. It wasn't something that really appealed to me. So it was very easy for me to hide my real life. And when I started sharing my story and seeing the feedback I was getting, people writing me saying, hey, because you were willing to talk about this, I've also decided to go to therapy. Or women would write me and say, man, I wish my husband had read this before he took his life 2 months ago. And a lot of really powerful, heavy stuff came my way, but also stuff that I saw a lot of good coming. A lot of people were finding motivation in what I was doing. And they're also finding just their own acceptance, and it's okay to be human and admit when you're dealing with hard times. And at that point, I kind of made the decision that with my writing, I was going to continue that way because it just felt relieving for me. And it also just felt like the most honest way to maintain my writing career. Because even as the captain, I always strived to be very honest. I don't like to ever question myself, and I don't like others to question me either. So even though I had the moniker on my work, it was very much my work. So yeah, when I came back, I just went full bore into being honest and being as real as possible.
Dude, and I think it's so key too. And I think there's power in vulnerability and being able to talk through your pain. I mentioned before I hit record, the first time somebody said, hey, because of your podcast, I decided not to take my life. It's this eye-opening thing of like, wow, if you just have deep conversation and hopefully somebody's listening somewhere in the world and they go, that's what I needed to hear in that very moment. And the only way you get there is through vulnerability and authenticity. Now, throughout the world right now, there's a lot of, with Andrew Tate and toxic masculinity and all these terms that get thrown out there, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think the term, first of all, I think toxic masculinity is some made up thing. But also with that being said, masculinity is slowly slipping away. Now you're somebody who appears on the outside. You got the beard, you got the tattoos, you're a tough dude, like all these things, right? Masculine. So what is your take on what's happening right now in the world with what is masculinity? Because I think some people approach it like, oh, I can't be vulnerable. Oh, I can't be emotional. Oh, I can't share what I'm going through. But I think it's the exact opposite. Do you have a similar take on that?
Absolutely. I think as we've learned a lot the past few years, extremes on either end are usually extremely stupid. Um, and so toxic masculinity for me is just a label for being an asshole, in my opinion. Um, you cited individuals like Andrew Tate, and I don't know too much about him. I don't spend a lot of time on social media actually viewing what's going on. I kind of post and get out of there and get on with my life. But I've seen enough videos to kind of know where you're going with it. And that's the guy I would just call an asshole. Like he's just an asshole. That's just the way he is. And a lot of people mistake being an asshole for being confident, or they misrepresent the idea of having boundaries as being an asshole. And so I do believe it's important to have boundaries, but when having boundaries with other people means you're an asshole, that's when you got a problem you got to work out. And so to me, masculinity, first and foremost, I think is honesty. And it takes more courage, and it's harder to be an honest individual than it is to be someone who fakes like they're tough, or it is to be someone who pretends to be anything they're not. Like the hardest thing you can be in your life is yourself. And that's why you see so many people struggle with it. And so your version of masculinity might be different than mine in the sense that I might have masculine traits that people would, describe as masculine. But that just is who I am as a person. And I don't care whether or not someone considers themselves tough or considers themselves weak or more feminine or masculine. What I care about is people just being themselves, like you being you. And the older I get, the more patience I have for people doing their own thing, and the less patience I have for people trying to be like everyone else. And I try to avoid defining masculinity for that reason, because I think when you define it as, being masculine means you're fit and it means you stand up for things, like, yeah, that stuff's true. But ultimately, it's just being honest. That shit's hard. And if you could do that, good for fucking you. And so it probably wasn't the answer you're looking for, but I think it's the answer that makes the most sense to me. And I think it's the answer that people need to hear right now. I think in society, we need to stop trying to create a list of bullet points to check off to label yourself as this or that, and really just embrace the struggle of being human, be someone of character, which means be yourself, stand up for your belief in, have hard conversations, do things that fucking suck because they'll make you a better person. And, for me, what fucking sucks is going to be completely different for someone else. I mean, there's this whole kind of trend online right now about embracing, these long runs, like David Goggins style stuff where, oh, you got to run 100 fucking miles. Yeah, I get it. There's a lot of good mental strength that comes from that. But if you're running 100 miles, but you're being incredibly guarded in your relationship and you're afraid to open up to your significant other, I don't care how fucking much you can run. If you don't have the courage to be yourself with the person you supposedly love, or you don't have the courage to put yourself out there in dating, I don't consider you someone that's that tough, honestly. You just happen to have one thing you're really fucking good at and you've embraced, but you haven't embraced all the aspects of being human.
Yeah. It's funny. You said earlier, it's probably not the answer you were looking for. I don't ask any of these questions with an expected, within expectations of what somebody would say. I think the journey with the Growth Now movement and the podcast has always been like, hey, I'm on this journey along with everybody else, and just
Yeah.
curious as to how minds work. And I think it's so fascinating. You talking about how one of the hardest things to do is to be ourselves. Can you expand a little bit on that? Like, why do you feel like it's so difficult for somebody to just be like, I'm unapologetically myself, whether that offends you or not? Like, there's
Because
so much of this. I have to fit into this or this.
it's exactly what you just said. It offends people. A lot of people can't take criticism. And you see, that's why I believe identity politics have become so strong too. It's a very easy way to feel like you're a part of something without actually having to do any work, without having to really express yourself or put yourself out there. It's harder to be honest about your opinions when it comes to political things, knowing that both sides of this bullshit two-party system we're in can attack you. It's very easy to side with one party and just say yes, 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 and to everything than it is to actually have some critical thinking and know, wait, this, and to stop it and say, no, this doesn't make sense right here, and open yourself up for some flack. And we saw that a lot over the past couple of years where people pretended to believe certain things just to avoid being labeled a conspiracy theorist, or people
Mm.
pretended to support certain things because they didn't want to be labeled a murderer. And it was this massive level of just attack on every bit of the individual aspect of ourselves. I mean, individuality has been on attack more than anything. And that's why people have the hardest time doing it. They don't want to be seen as a bad person. They don't want to be seen as an asshole. They don't want to be seen as, all those other labels I used. Because when you're yourself, you are a very complex individual. We all are. Anyone who can live their entire life black and white is not being true to themselves, because there is so much gray in life. And there's so many times when you're going to have to disagree with people for the sake of standing for something or for the sake of having some integrity. And that to me is where, when you say masculinity is fading away, really it's integrity fading away, in my opinion. It's
Mm.
people don't have integrity anymore, and integrity is very much directly correlated with being an honest person and being someone of character. And I can appreciate anyone with integrity, even if I disagree with them, even if what you're saying I think is completely wrong. if you do it from a place of where I know you're just standing to a core belief, I fucking respect that. I have the utmost respect for anyone that can do that because I've done it a lot myself and I know how fucking hard it is.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, especially now in this divisive world, is the whatever the next thing is that they're going to divide and conquer, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Electric
that's the
cars.
that is the next thing, man. And it's just unreal. And you're not in California anymore, correct? You're in Texas now.
No, no, I'm not in Texas. I'm in South Florida, actually.
Oh, nice, cool.
I
Yeah,
just I just spend a lot of time in Texas because I like it there.
there you go. I was wondering. So Florida and Texas, you guys weren't as affected as the rest of the world, although you had the whole entire country attacking you
I
in
mean,
so many
I
ways.
I lived in LA when all of this kicked off, though. I was living in Marina Del Rey in 2020 when all this happened, and my girlfriend and I saw how quickly it was going downhill. There was a grocery store around the corner from my apartment, and they had police dogs at the grocery store making sure people only went in one at a time. And this was like 2 weeks into lockdowns. It was getting
Wow.
bad quick. And we saw that and we just weren't going to stand for it. So we just moved to Vegas. We just rented a home. We just wanted to get out. Vegas was a quick drive. We could load some shit up, take the animals, and go. And we ended up getting pregnant with my son. So we waited till he was born in Vegas. And then we made the move to Florida. So I've only been in Florida for almost a year now. So I very much was in the belly of the beast for a long time, even because Vegas shut down. I mean, the strip completely shut down. So I, for a year, year and a half, know what it was like being in areas that were completely, chaotic in the sense that you had no real quality of life for quite a while.
Yeah, and I'm obviously in Pennsylvania, and so the state itself was very much shut down. Like you couldn't go to Philadelphia, and you couldn't walk outside in Philadelphia without somebody telling you to put a mask on, even outside. So you see that, and then where we live in our county, it was very open. Like it was just like
Yeah,
do what you want kind of deal, right? They tried shutting down restaurants. Restaurants were like no, and so
good,
I
good.
saw the
Like
devices.
yeah, I was
Go,
just not to cut you off, but like
no,
just talking about the restaurant things, that's one of the most heartbreaking things for me because as somewhat of an entrepreneur myself, essentially writing is a form of entrepreneurship. I was back in New York recently and I was trying to find a place to eat, and I lived in New York for a couple of years. Every restaurant that I wanted to go to that I had a good memory of has shut down permanently.
mhm.
It was gone for good. And the fact that those people are not going to see anything from it, like I mean, some of those are 20, 30-year family restaurants just wiped away over some absolute bullshit overreach is very heartbreaking to see. And had more people had integrity, we didn't need more masculinity. You could use that word too. But we needed more people with integrity, male, female, whatever the fuck you want to call yourself. If we had that integrity, we could have prevented a lot of that stuff, I believe.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to see. So we didn't have any restaurants in our county shut down due to the shutdowns. But then my fiance and I last June spent a night in Pittsburgh, and just walking through Pittsburgh, we were like 60% of the restaurants were shut down, boarded up, done,
Sad.
closed. It's so sad, and I don't know if it's necessarily the end. So let's future forecast some things now. Play play that role. What do you see happening next in this country, and then what can we do to avoid potential overtaking, or however you want to view it?
I feel like we're on a precipice of either something really good or really bad. I think more people than ever have been awakened to the idea they can't blindly follow the media and they can't trust those in power to actually do what's best for them. I think people really feel that now. I think there's still a lot of people living in fear, which I can understand to an extent. Um, I think there's an opportunity, though, for people to come together and understand that the divisiveness that's been thrust upon us for the past couple of years is wrong. And it's one of the things I've tried really hard to not participate in. And, you said you followed me for a couple of years, so you probably watched the way I behaved throughout this, the lockdowns of pandemic. I probably lost as many followers as I gained because I was always very critical of the media, what we were being told, and I was very critical of anything that was intentionally divisive. And I'll post something one week and I'll have conservatives attack me, and I'll post something the next week and liberals will attack me. And I see that as a compliment because it means I am sticking to an individual belief as opposed to falling into a bucket. And it's been hard to do that at times. And there's been times when I questioned my ability to do that, particularly in early 2020. I had a book deal with a large publisher. My book was set to release that summer. And I knew where my publisher stood. I could kind of see where they stood based on emails and stuff like that. And when I started speaking out on things, I was pretty sure I was going to lose my publishing deal. And I had told my girlfriend, I said, listen, if I lose my publishing deal because I want to speak from my heart, I want to speak of what I see, I'm willing to do that at this point because my entire career as this captain character has been predicated on speaking my mind. And if I don't speak my mind now, everything I've done up to this point is completely invalid. I've become a hypocrite. And so I was like, fuck it, I'm going to speak my mind. I already had half the book advanced, so either way I was keeping that. But if I did lose that book, it was a risk I was willing to take at that point. And I didn't lose the book. The book still came out, still did really well. Plus I have the assurance of knowing that I always stuck by my principles throughout it. And so it was the best situation that could have come for me. And so I think there's an opportunity for that to happen for a lot of people. When you realize your fears probably aren't going to be as bad as you make them out to be in your head, it gives yourself some space to not only hold grace for yourself, but hold grace for others and understand that the only way to ever get through what we just went through, if it happens again, is to come together. That's what we needed early on. And when you have every news outlet, paid celebrity, and whatever other bullshit you were listening to at the time trying to tell you to do the opposite, that's when you know there's an issue with it. I'll never forget some of the monologues I saw of those late night shows. I'll never forget some of the
Mm-hmm.
videos I saw celebrities posting. I'll never forget some of the opinions of people that used to be close to me expressed in the sense that it was very aggressive. I hope you all die kind of stuff. And I never wanted to be a part of it. And just seeing how much it was happening encouraged me more to go hard on trying to encourage people to come together and think for themselves and have some grace for each other.
Yeah, and so many people like you and Andy and Joe Rogan. I admire the fact that you guys never, and I'm very similar. You never, or we never, put ourselves in a total full bucket, right? Oh, I'm a Republican, so therefore I follow every single thing and believe every single thing they say. Or I'm a Democrat, so I'm going to believe every single thing they say and follow every single thing they say. It's a case by case basis, right? And it's not about judging somebody else for what they feel or what they believe. And I saw the divisiveness, right? Like I've seen people who, particularly my fiance was friends with, who, called people unvaccinated asshats and all
Yeah.
these things and like wanting to attack. And I'm just like, where's the acceptance? And I think that's the goal here is, right, how do we come together? How do we move forward together, even if we don't agree? And that's the hardest part right now is people can't get past the fact that, oh, my opinion is different than yours, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna team up on anything, let's team up on lip syncing videos on TikTok. Let's team up on something that really needs. Let's team up on something that really needs to go away. Um, yeah, I mean, I had a friend and I saw a tweet she posted that said something along the lines of, "I can't wait for all the unvaccinated to die already, so my family can go back outside." And I was like,
Hmm.
"Whoa, whoa, are you fucking kidding me?" And I'm not friends with her, and I probably never will be again. I'm very open to forgiveness and I'm open to, understanding someone might have been speaking from a place of fear. But at the same time, anyone who's capable of going that far in a situation like that, I don't want to be around. And a lot of people lost their minds in that way. And I like what you said about, guys like Andy and myself and Joe not putting ourselves in any category because both of those men are guys that I believe have integrity and they have had to lay on the sword at many times in their careers. And there's stuff I disagree with them as well. I mean, I'm really good friends with Andy. I don't know Joe at all, but both of them say stuff I agree with and say stuff I don't agree with. But I can respect every part of what they do because I know that they are just, like I said earlier, they are being themselves, and it's the hardest thing anyone can do. And that is why they get so much criticism.
Yeah. And like you said, falling on the sword and being able to kind of carry that criticism is the hardest part for so many people. Going back to the
Mm-hmm.
original statement of it, so the hardest thing to do is be yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because of everything that comes with it. But I want to switch gears a little bit here. I didn't think we'd have a COVID conversation.
I didn't either. It just kind
Yeah,
of goes that way sometimes.
it just happened.
Now,
Um,
now you're gonna get that little flag on your Spotify posting.
exactly. Yeah, it's the that fun game we all have to play. But when we look at this, man, you've had a massive change in your life over the last couple of years, becoming a father for the first
Yeah.
time. Um, I am not a father of my own biological children, but I'm getting married in April. She has 2 kids. They call me bonus dad. And
It's
so that's been
awesome.
the last number of years of my life, and so many lessons that I continue to learn every single day of how to navigate that role in their lives. Let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons you've learned now as a father, and retrospectively, what it's kind of had you look at yourself and go, wow, I need to make some changes maybe.
When I found out I was gonna be a dad, it was the singular most fear-inducing moment of my life. I was not ready for it. I'd kind of slumped back into some depression because a lot of my career had fallen off during the lockdowns because I was doing a lot of hospitality consulting, and it just felt like too much for me at the time. But now that I've been a dad for about 15 months, nothing has ever made so much sense to me. I can't picture my life without him. And even like a month in, I couldn't picture my life without him. Becoming a father for me has made life so much less complex. And I think the fear a lot of
Hmm.
people have about becoming a parent is that's going to make my life more complicated. What it's done for me is it's simplified my decision making in a lot of ways because I think first and foremost, how is this going to affect my kid? Or if my son was old enough to understand what I'm doing, would he be ashamed of the way I'm acting right now? Am I setting a good example for him? I already see him parroting back stuff that I do now, and he's young, but he'll mimic movements, he'll mimic noises, he'll use a couple words, and just seeing the impact I have on him has really kind of narrowed my focus and helped me hone in on what I want to do with my career, but more so who I want to be as an individual, the kind of character I want to have. And it sounds cliche, but being a dad is the best thing that happened to me, both personally and professionally, because I think my writing's better now. And for the first time in my life, I feel like my writing has more impact than I used to. I mean, early in the days of my social media, kind of clout when it was growing, I really just wanted to either make people think or make people laugh. And now my focus is really on how can I affect some real change? How can I synopsize something that I'm going through in a way that helps other people feel understood and not feel alone? And also, how can I create something that lives on well beyond me? Say I some freak accident takes me to 5 years from now. What can I do over those next 5 years to make sure I leave a real mark on the world? And I didn't have that long term focus before I was a dad. I very much was someone who prided myself on not having routine. I wanted to live in the now. I wanted to just kind of, live my life as fast as possible and fit in as much stuff as possible without really any concern about tomorrow or the next week kind of thing. And it's something that I feared happening to me. I feared my life slowing down. I thought it was going to make me less creative or boring. But in the slowdown, it's had the exact opposite effect. And so it's something I've talked about often with new fathers and people that are afraid to become a father. If you embrace it, it is going to be so rewarding. And in parenting my son, or even just kind of thinking back on when in my life did I develop this certain insecurity, or when in my life did I start thinking this way, it's helped me come to terms with a lot of my past. And it's helped me almost reparent myself in a way to where I feel more confident, I feel more capable, and I feel like I understand myself a hell of a lot better than I did before I had my son. And it's been fucking great. And I'm stoked to hear that you've had a similar experience, even with, your two kids of your fiance. And I hope that you get the opportunity to have a kid of your own, because there's just something so powerful and connecting about it.
I think so. I'm too old to have a kid of my own.
No, you're not.
So I'm 38. So I'm 38 now, and my fiance is 5 years older than me.
How
So
is that too? Well, I can see that. All right. Well, you could adopt a really young one then.
that's true. But the lessons that I've learned, for me at least, because the kids are 12 and 9 now,
Mm,
and see
that's a
them
fun age.
it's a ton of fun. But now we're getting into like the preteen attitudes and finding my patience in that, and understanding that this is a part of life versus him just wanting to give us attitudes all the time.
Yeah.
I think there's great lessons in just parenting in general. And I never,
Yeah.
I will most likely never experience, you can never say never, but I will most likely never experience the patients learned when they're crying and they can't tell me what's wrong, and
That's,
changing of the diapers in the middle of the night, and all these other
yeah.
things. And there's some gratitude there. I don't think I want to go through that. But again, there's so many lessons in that, man. And so one thing I like that you do is you learn from the past, right? So you have a book, Fucking History. I want to talk a little bit about your thought process of diving into the history of the world, and why things have happened, and why you decided to kind of take a modern approach in retrospect to what happened in the past.
Yeah, so fucking history really came about because I hated history in school myself. Growing up in Utah, a lot of the history I learned was Mormon history. I never learned a lot of the cool shit that I consider worth learning today. And it was in my 20s when there was that stuff that would go around online, like the what the F fact.com website, whatever it was at the time, where they'd share weird historical facts. And I'd read some of those and be like, there's no way that's fucking true. And so I'd start doing my own research and be like, wait a minute, that really happened. And that kind of jump started my desire to learn about history myself. And when I started reading more about it, one of the things I liked was it showed the commonality we all have as humans, no matter what time period we're growing up in. Sure, we're going to have differences as far as technology and the way social media affects us, as opposed to a couple generations prior to us. But whether you're a king or a queen or a conqueror, we all dealt with the same emotions. We all deal with fear. We all deal with love. We all deal with heartbreak. We all deal with envy and jealousy and all that shit. And so I love the idea of taking some of these stories that seemed ridiculous, that were true, and tying them to your life today, in the sense that, here was a queen who was wronged by her husband. So she left and raised an army and came back and chopped his head off and took her castle back. So let's relate that to you being cheated on by your boyfriend, and how you might feel the need to chop his head off, but how you can handle that today. And so it was just a cool way, and it was almost a creative challenge for me to connect these events to current life. And in doing so, I found a lot of people, again, they felt understood, and it helped them feel like they weren't crazy. And when I do speaking engagements, a lot of the times I talk about historical events at these speaking engagements, and I try and take, like, if I speak to a college crowd, for example, I love telling the story of Vincent van Gogh, because that dude fucking sucked at everything he did. He was completely lost. He didn't have it all figured out in his 20s like we feel we should these days. It wasn't until he was 28 that he even started painting. But by the time he died, I think it was like 37, he painted over 2,000 works of art. So in that short span of his life, he left behind this massive legacy that we respect and revere today. But when he was alive, he didn't see any fame. He didn't
Mm.
see any success from that. But he painted because he just enjoyed painting. And look at what it has done to the world, the effect he's had on the world. And, I'm not much of a religious man, but I like to think if he's somewhere on the other side, he can look back and be like, damn, like, good for me, kind of thing, and be proud of what he accomplished. If not, I mean, we can still appreciate it. So I love that aspect of history, and that's really what drew me to it.
Yeah. So what moments of history and parenting do you feel like you're learning from and putting into place now as a father?
What do you mean by that? I'm kind of confused by that question.
So you look back at history and go, there's lessons in history. So whether it be your own personal history or the history of the world of parenting and the proper way to do it, have you pulled any lessons from that?
I mean, there's the patience aspect of it, which you had to be a good war general. You had to be very patient in the way you attacked countries back then. It's kind of similar to raising a kid. You have to be patient and calculated in the way you approach them sometimes. But I think for the most part, what I've applied to my parenthood journey is my own childhood, in the sense that growing up in a very um, conservative religion, Mormonism, LDS, whatever you want to call it, I felt a lot of shame and guilt growing up. And I felt very misunderstood at times, because when I would seek someone for advice, say as a teenager, when we're all awkward and lost, and I wanted advice from someone, whether it was, my parents or other elders that I respected, the advice was almost always, pray about it, read the scriptures, talk to your bishop. And that's not the shit I needed to hear. What I needed to hear was a human talking to me like a human and relating to me. Just with that idea in mind, um, I want my son throughout his life to know that he can come to me and he can talk to me about anything awkward, weird, embarrassing moment, and I'm not going to judge him. I'm going to be there to hold space and listen and probably laugh, because I'll do. And I honestly look forward to that. I can't wait for the team to riot. And it's also why I want to be so honest myself, because I would like my son, someday he's going to find these podcasts. Someday he's going to look back on YouTube videos of me talking, and he's going to be like, damn, like my dad really kind of stood up for himself, and he was very willing to talk about this stuff. And he's going to hear some of the stories that I share in my books or on these podcasts and think, wow, my dad fucked up. Like he did a lot of dumb shit. I guess I'm not so bad, kind of thing. And he's just going to hopefully relate to me on another level that allows me to be there for him throughout his life. I mean, when he's 40, I want him to be able to still feel like he can call me and ask me advice on what he might be going on in his life.
Yeah, dude, I love it. So I want to ask you a question that I ask every single person on this podcast. It's a two-part question. The first part is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
My definition of success is making a living without having to answer to anyone. That to me is success. And that is where I'm at now in my writing career. 3-4 years ago, I still very much had an office job. I was writing at night or on the side. I still had to largely report to other people, and all I ever wanted was the ability to not have to wake up to an alarm clock if I didn't want to. And I wanted to be able to write what I want to write. And right now, I make a comfortable living writing what I want to write, and I plan my own days. I travel when I want. I don't answer to anyone other than myself, which makes it very easy to procrastinate. But I also find it incredibly motivating, because I'm the one that I'm the linchpin of my life. If I don't get my shit together, no one else is going to do it for me. And that's the thing with writing. I can't neglect it, because it won't happen if I don't do it. It's like working out. Someone else can't work out for you. It's very obvious if you don't work out. And it's very obvious to me if I'm not writing. And so I love the self accountability of it. And so one of the things I do to ensure that I always feel like I have a successful day is, I haven't been as good as it lately, but I try not to schedule anything in the morning. I like my mornings slow. I like my mornings to be the way I want them to be. And I don't like to schedule anything if I can avoid it until afternoon. So that way I can, if I want to sleep in, or if I want to get up early and go on a long walk or go to the gym, or if I want to hang out with my son and cook breakfast and, watch some shows with him, I have the ability to do that, because that makes me feel like I'm in control of my life. And then also, I force myself to write every day, whether it's a tweet or 5 pages of a book I'm working on, or just, like some random journaling of thoughts that I'll save to a Word doc and maybe revisit it in 6 months and turn it into something. I have to write every day. If I don't write, I feel like an itch under my skin. Like I just feel like the day was wasted. And so I try to write every day. But then also, the last thing is and I wasn't like this always, I'm very cognizant of what I put in my body, because I understand what I eat affects how I feel, and how I feel affects how I think, and how I think affects how I write. So I try to eat very healthy. And if I eat something crappy, or if I have a couple of drinks the night before and I wake up the next day hungover, feeling kind of lethargic and off, it's hard for me to feel like I've had a successful day, because I just don't feel like I'm in control of my day as much. So those are probably the three things I really focus on off the top of my head. And then again, success is just it's freedom to me.
Yeah, dude, I love it, man. And I love the idea of not doing anything in the morning. So my calendar doesn't normally open up till about 10:30, 11.
That's too
Um,
early.
I wake up to an alarm before 6 a.m. because of children and school and
Yeah.
all those things. And so we have to
Yeah.
we have to get moving earlier than most.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's 10:30, depending on the day, sometimes 11. But I love being able to go, okay, I don't have to rush based off of somebody else's schedule.
I
So I
hate
love,
rushing.
yeah, it's the absolute worst. And I am currently writing my first book, and writing is not natural for me. Like that's why I
Mhm.
started a podcast instead of a blog, right? And so it's been quite the labor, and I hope one day I can call it a labor of love. But it's coming together nicely, man. And so that idea of writing at least a little bit a day is definitely key to getting it done. And you've written some great work. So what's next for you, man? Like, what's the next book all about? Do you have that in mind yet? What are you thinking?
Mm. Yeah, I definitely am very much in the trenches in my next book right now, and it is a memoir style book where I'm diving a lot more into my life. Um, a memoir is something I never intended to write, and if I did, it was something I didn't plan to write until I was in like my 50s or 60s. I thought it was pretty self-centered to write a memoir in your 30s, but the more I do these podcasts, the more I receive feedback from people. I see the benefit to me telling my story, not only to kind of alleviate some pain for myself, but also people can relate to it. And again, drawing it back to my son, if something were to happen to me, I would like to have something he could read that would give him a pretty good sense of who I was. And the memoirs, the way that makes the most sense for me to do that. You hear about people who start recording videos for their kids, so when they're 18 they can watch them and stuff. I would like to write this book. If something happens, my son's old enough, he could read it and be like, okay, I get a pretty good sense of who my dad was. And that's the book I'm currently working on. I've also finished two children's books that I'm currently illustrating. Well, my dad's illustrating them for me, but my
That's awesome.
father and I are working together on them. My dad's been an illustrator his whole life. I grew up, sitting in his art room while he illustrated whatever book he was currently working on.
That's cool.
And I love the idea of that, because for me, growing up, it was Shel Silverstein, Dr. Seuss. It was those men and that writing that I really enjoyed. I loved it. And I've always liked the rhyme structure. I've always liked the challenge of taking difficult ideas and distilling them down to something simple and kind of fun. And that reflects a lot in my writing that I do. I rhyme a lot intentionally. I'm very short and deliberate with my words because I admire that style of writing. So the children's books have been great. I'm also working on two TV series, and then I have half a dozen book ideas in my head at all times, and I always kind of drop down outlines when they come to me. So once the memoir's out of the way, I'll jump right onto another book. And that's really my goal from here on out, is to write longer format, real books. And I hope to someday become an author, because I don't consider myself an author yet. I think I'm a writer.
Hmm.
I think authors create worlds and writers write about the world. And that's kind of my way of just paying respect to authors, people who write really dramatic, well done works of nonfiction. And that is hopefully where I'm going to go with my career. I know I'm going to try it. I'm going to take a stab at it, and hopefully becomes the next thing for me. I would love to just write one book a year and just focus deeply on something super meaningful, and then let's kind of see what goes from there.
I love it, dude. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question, but before we get there, how do people get a hold of you? Where do they get your books? What's all the good stuff?
Yeah, I mean, all my books are available on Amazon if they search fucking history or speech therapy is my most recent one. But if they search either Kyle Creek or the Captain on basically any social media platform, they'll find my profiles, and it links to all my books and stuff from there.
Awesome, man. Like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question since the show is called the Growth Now Movement. The question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Becoming a dad, but not so much becoming a dad, accepting my role as a father. It's very easy to become a dad, but accepting my role as a father and not only acknowledge the impact I have on my son, but the impact I can have on the world. For the first time in my life, I do feel like I have been called to do something more. I don't know what that is yet, but I actually believe it. And I do think this presence and this audience that I've accumulated over the years, I think there's something very powerful with that. And I plan to use it to do something pretty grandiose. I just don't know what that is, but I believe I'm capable of it now.
Awesome, man. Kyle, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey with me and my audience, man. This has been great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.